They said she threw away her future by marrying a man who drove for others. They mocked her dress, her ring, even her faith in him. But when engines roared through their street years later, every laugh died in their throats, because the same driver they despised was now the one they couldn't afford to look in the eye. The wedding hall smelled faintly of wilting roses and disappointment. Amina stood tall in her simple white dress, her hands trembling slightly as Malik slipped the ring onto her finger. Around them whispers floated like smoke. Her father's empty seat in the front row said everything. He had refused to give her away, ashamed that his daughter was marrying a man who drove for a living. Her aunt's sharp voice sliced through the quiet ceremony. Amina was top of her class, and this is who she chose? She muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. A few cousins giggled, one even whispering, "Love doesn't pay rent, my dear." Their laughter stung, but Amina's eyes never left Malik's. He wasn't rich, but there was a strength in his silence, a quiet dignity that no degree or fancy title could buy. His suit was old but pressed neatly. His shoes shined to perfection. When he looked at her, it wasn't with pride or possession. It was with gratitude, as though he couldn't believe someone saw the man behind the steering wheel. As they exchanged vows, the guests shifted uncomfortably. There were no photographers, no music, no grand buffet. Just a small promise between two hearts that refused to let judgment define them. Malik's hand shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. "I may not have much now," he whispered so only she could hear, "but I'll build something worthy of you." Tears welled in her eyes. She held his hand tightly and replied softly, "They'll see one day." Her words carried a quiet fire, one that Malik would never forget. Behind them, her aunt sighed dramatically. "We'll see how long this fairy tale lasts," she said under her breath. But destiny was already taking notes. As the small congregation filed out, Amina caught sight of the empty chair where her father should have been. Her heart sank for a moment, but when she turned to Malik and saw the humble smile on his face, she felt peace. The world could mock her choices, but she knew what they didn't. This was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something extraordinary, written not in wealth or status, but in faith, love, and patience. And one day, the same mouths that whispered would fall silent in awe. After the wedding, Amina and Malik began their new life in a tiny single-room house tucked behind the noisy bus park. The air always smelled of oil, dust, and roasted maize, but to them it was home. Their bed creaked when they laughed, their roof leaked when it rained, but every evening, Amina would wait at the door for Malik's taxi to pull up, her smile brighter than any chandelier. Amina worked long hours as a cashier at a corner shop, counting other people's money while saving every coin of her own. Malik spent his days driving through the chaos of Nairobi, dodging potholes, passengers, and exhaustion. At night they shared stories, cheap food, and quiet dreams. They didn't have much, but they had peace, the kind that no money could buy. Her family, however, didn't see it that way. They stopped calling, stopped visiting, pretending she had disappeared. To them, Amina had chosen poverty over pride. One evening, her brother showed up, his car tires crunching on the gravel outside. He carried a bag of old clothes and a smirk on his face. He looked around the small house with disgust before saying, "You could have had a man with a degree, Amina. Instead, you married a steering wheel." For a moment, silence filled the air, but Amina didn't flinch. She looked at him calmly, her hands steady as she folded the clothes he had brought. Then she said softly, "And yet my heart is full, something your suits can't buy." Her words hung in the air like quiet thunder. Her brother said nothing more and left, slamming the door behind him. Malik, who had overheard it all, came to her side and took her hand. He didn't need to say a word. His eyes told her he would spend his life proving her right. That night, the rain poured hard, dripping through the cracks of their roof. They placed buckets under the leaks and sat together, sharing roasted corn and laughter as thunder rolled outside. In that little room, surrounded by nothing but dreams and love, Amina realized something. Happiness was not found in big houses or rich friends. It lived right there, in their small space filled with hope, struggle, and a love that refused to fade. One late evening, Malik came home with his shirt stained in oil and sweat, his hands dark with grease, but his eyes, they burned with something new. Amina was stirring ugali on the small stove when he burst in. breathless but smiling like he carried a secret too big to hold. "Amina," he said, wiping his hands on an old cloth, "what if one day I don't drive for people but people drive for me?" Amina turned, puzzled, but Malik was already pulling out a worn notebook from his pocket. He placed it on their tiny table, flipping through pages filled with sketches of cars, routes, numbers, and ideas. At the top of one page, written proudly in shaky handwriting, were the words Owino Logistics. He began explaining how he wanted to create a company that linked transporters across East Africa, how drivers could find fair jobs without being cheated, and how he could one day own a fleet of taxis and trucks under one name. His voice trembled with excitement, his eyes glowing brighter than the single bulb hanging above them. Amina listened quietly. The room smelled of sweat and hope. She didn't laugh, even when she saw how impossible it sounded. She just reached out, placed her hand on his and said softly, "Then we'll start saving today." Her words settled in the air like a promise. Malik looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw not just his wife but his destiny's partner. That night they took an old wooden box, cleaned it, and wrote on it with a marker, "Our road." Every day, no matter how tired or broke they were, they dropped something inside: coins, sometimes a small note, sometimes just a piece of paper with a dream written on it. There were days when the box felt too small for such a big dream, but Amina would smile and say, "Every road begins with one step." As the months passed, that box became more than just savings. It became their symbol of hope. While others mocked and doubted them, Amina and Malik were quietly building a future hidden beneath layers of grease, love, and faith. The year that followed tested everything they had built together. Malik's old taxi, the one that had carried countless passengers in their dreams, finally gave up on him. The engine refused to start one morning, and even the mechanic shook his head slowly, saying, "It's gone, brother." Malik tried everything. He borrowed tools, begged for used parts, worked extra hours with friends' cars, but nothing lasted. Soon the calls for rides stopped coming. His phone, once buzzing with customers, sat silent on the small wooden table. Rent notices began stacking up on their door. The laughter that once filled their one-room house was replaced by the sound of rain dripping through the cracked roof. When Amina's family heard about their struggles, they didn't come with help, they came with judgment. One afternoon, her mother arrived with her sister and brother, standing at the doorway like royalty visiting a ruin. Her mother looked around the cramped room, the worn curtains, the dim light, and shook her head in disgust. "You married a driver," she hissed. "Now drive your way out of hunger." Her words cut through the room like a knife. Amina's brother chuckled, muttering something about poor choices and pride. Amina stood still, her hands trembling, but she said nothing. She just turned away, swallowing the pain that rose in her throat. Malik stood in the corner, his eyes lowered, his face burning with shame. Every word from them felt like a slap. That night, after everyone had left, he sat quietly on the edge of the bed. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of distant traffic. "Maybe they're right, Amina," he whispered, voice cracking. "Maybe I'm not enough." Amina looked at him, really looked. She saw the man who once dreamed of building Owino Logistics, the man who refused to give up even when life pushed him down. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice was steady. "You are enough," she said softly. "We just haven't reached our destination yet." Malik looked at her, her face shining even in their darkness. That night they didn't speak again. They just held each other, knowing storms may break everything, except a love built on belief. When hope seemed like a luxury they could no longer afford, Amina did something no one expected. She took off her wedding bangles, her gold earrings, the few gifts from her family she had left, and sold them quietly at a small jewelry shop downtown. With the money, she rented a tiny space near the main road and set up a roadside cafe. It was nothing fancy, just 2 benches, a tin roof, and the smell of strong tea, but to her it was a seed of hope. Each morning before dawn, she would light the stove, fry chapatis, and brew tea for the early drivers heading out to work. Her hands worked fast, her smile never fading, even when exhaustion tried to weigh her down. Malik, after long nights repairing engines in the corner of a mechanic's yard, would come straight to her side, still smelling of oil and metal, to help serve customers. The cafe soon became a familiar stop for drivers and conductors. They came not just for the food, but for the warmth, the way Amina treated everyone like family. Sometimes when business was slow, she would glance at Malik and whisper, "We'll make it, one plate at a time." And he'd nod, believing her even when his body ached from sleepless nights. Every coin they earned went into their wooden savings box, the same one they had once labeled "Our Road." They lived simply, never buying what they didn't need. No holidays, no outings, no complaints, just quiet determination. For 3 long years their love became a rhythm of work, sacrifice, and silent prayers whispered under the stars. Then one evening, as the cafe lights flickered in the warm Nairobi dusk, Malik's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. On the other end, a man's voice said, "Malik Owino? You once drove me to Mombasa years ago. I never forgot your honesty. I'm expanding my transport company and need someone trustworthy to manage my fleet. Are you interested?" Malik froze, his hands trembling. He looked at Amina, the woman who had traded gold for dreams, and tears welled in his eyes. That single call didn't just offer a job, it offered a future. Amina smiled softly and whispered, "See? I told you. They'd see one day." The years that followed were quiet, not because life was easy, but because they were building something the world wasn't watching. While others slept, Amina and Malik worked through long nights filled with the sound of clattering dishes, phone calls, and the hum of truck engines in the distance. Their cafe, once just a roadside stop, had turned into a small restaurant that drivers, travelers, and families loved. People came from different parts of Nairobi just to taste Amina's food made with patience, warmth, and the story of 2 dreamers who never gave up. Malik, on the other hand, was changing too. The man who once drove an old taxi now wore clean shirts and carried a small notebook wherever he went. He had started managing more vehicles under his old client's company, and soon realized he could do even more. Every evening after work, while Amina closed the restaurant, Malik would sit by the light of a small desk lamp, studying business management and logistics. He wanted to learn how to grow not just for himself but for them. They didn't visit Amina's family anymore. In fact, her relatives still whispered that she was struggling somewhere with a broke driver. They had no idea that behind those modest clothes and simple smiles, a quiet empire was forming. Amina didn't bother correcting them. She had learned that success makes the loudest noise when it's silent. One day Malik brought home a set of shiny keys. Not for a car but for a truck. His very own truck. Amina cried when she saw it, running her hands over the logo she had drawn years ago. A steering wheel wrapped in a heart. "Our road," she whispered, remembering the wooden box they once filled with coins and hope. Months turned into years. One truck became 3, then 5, then 20. Each one carried that same logo proudly painted on the side. A symbol of love turned into legacy. Together they built Owino Logistics, a company that began in poverty but grew on faith, sweat, and unity. The world didn't see their struggle, but soon, it would see their rise. 5 years later, Amina's phone buzzed with a message that made her heart skip. Her younger sister, Zuri, was getting married. The same family that once turned their backs on her now sent an invitation to the grand pre-wedding dinner. Amina read the message twice, smiling faintly. She knew it wasn't about reconciliation, it was about show. Her family wanted to brag about Zuri's rich fiancé, a doctor from an elite family. Still, Amina decided to go. Not to prove anything, but to show grace where there had once been mockery. That evening, she dressed in a simple cream-colored gown that flowed softly when she walked. Her jewelry was minimal, but her confidence glowed brighter than gold. Malik offered to come along, but she smiled and said, "You'll know when to arrive." He nodded, understanding her unspoken words. When Amina stepped into the grand hall, the chatter softened. Heads turned, not because she wore luxury, but because peace seemed to walk with her. Her mother looked surprised, her cousins exchanged glances, and her aunt whispered, still acting humble even now. Moments later, her uncle chuckled loudly from across the table, his voice thick with sarcasm. "So, Amina, still driving your husband's taxi around the city?" he asked with fake concern. Laughter erupted around the table. Her cousins covered their mouths, pretending to hide their giggles. Amina didn't flinch. She simply looked at them, her lips curving into a calm smile. "Not anymore," she said softly. "He doesn't drive much these days." They burst into laughter again, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "Still the dreamer." To them, she was still the girl who had chosen love over status, the one who had fallen behind. But as dinner continued, a strange sound began to echo outside. A deep, steady rumble that made the windows tremble. The guests paused, their laughter fading. Someone stepped to the window, peering out into the night. Then another gasp followed, and another. Outside, headlights lined the street in perfect formation. Black SUVs and white trucks, their engines humming in rhythm. And at the front of the convoy was a sleek car slowly coming to a stop. Amina looked up, her calm smile returning. "I believe," she said softly, "my husband just arrived." As the family's laughter filled the dining hall, a low, powerful rumble began to rise from outside. First, no one paid attention. They thought it was ordinary city traffic passing by. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, deeper, like thunder rolling across the street. The glasses on the table trembled slightly. Conversations halted. Heads turned toward the window. When Amina's cousin peeked outside, her jaw dropped. What is that?" she stammered. Everyone hurried to the windows. Outside, under the soft glow of the streetlights, an entire convoy of black SUVs and spotless white trucks stood lined up, engines humming in perfect rhythm. On the side of each truck gleamed a bold logo, Owino Logistics, polished, proud, unmistakable. Whispers filled the hall. "Wait, that's Malik's company," someone murmured. "Impossible." Then the door opened, and in walked Malik Owino. The same man they once mocked for smelling like engine grease now carried an air of quiet power. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that fit him like confidence itself. Behind him stood his staff, smartly dressed, badges gleaming. The team that helped him build an empire. Every head turned. Every word froze. Amina rose to her feet as Malik walked toward her with a calm smile. He took her hand gently and kissed it, his eyes filled with pride and love. The family could only stare, too stunned to breathe. "Forgive me for being late," Malik said, his voice steady and composed. "There was traffic from my own trucks." His words sliced through the silence like lightning. The same mouths that once called him just a driver now hung open in disbelief. Her uncle, who had mocked him minutes ago, couldn't even lift his eyes. Her mother clutched her pearls, her father's lips trembled. Amina stood beside Malik, her face calm, her heart steady. She had imagined this day before. Not for revenge, but for closure. She looked around the room, her gaze soft but strong. Every person who once laughed at them was now trapped in their own silence. Outside, the engines of success still purred. The convoy didn't just shake the street, it shook every heart that ever doubted them. The air in the room had shifted. The same people who once whispered and mocked now sat in stunned silence, unable to meet Amina's eyes. Plates of untouched food sat cold on the table, and the sound of Malik's convoy still echoed faintly in the distance, like a reminder of how far they had come. Amina stood beside her husband, her hand still resting in his, while her family tried to gather the courage to speak. Finally, her father rose from his chair. His steps were slow, his face trembling with emotion. The proud man who once refused to attend his daughter's wedding now looked smaller, humbled by truth. He stopped in front of Malik, his voice shaky but sincere. "Son, I was wrong about you," he said softly. "I didn't see the man you were becoming. I saw only the driver, not the dreamer." Malik looked at him with calm eyes, no bitterness, no pride, just grace. He smiled gently and replied, "It's okay, Baba. You don't have to apologize. The road to respect is often the longest one." Those words sank deep into the hearts of everyone present. The man they once dismissed had not only succeeded, he had done so without anger, without vengeance. His dignity was his loudest victory. Amina's mother stepped forward next, her eyes glistening with tears. She wrapped her arms around her daughter tightly, her voice breaking. "We judged you by what we saw," she whispered, "not what you were building." We thought you had lost everything, but you were quietly creating everything we ever dreamed of." Amina smiled, her eyes wet but peaceful. "Mama," she said softly, "sometimes blessings wear overalls and smell like engine oil." Her mother let out a small laugh through her tears, holding her even tighter. Around them, the laughter that once carried mockery now carried warmth. For the first time in many years, love replaced shame in that house. Malik looked around the room. The same faces that once turned away now shone with newfound respect. And as he held Amina's hand again, he realized something powerful. Forgiveness was the sweetest kind of victory. Months later, the sound of engines once again filled the streets of Nairobi, but this time it wasn't for business or show. It was for purpose. Malik and Amina stood before a small crowd. The ribbon of a new building stretched across the entrance. The sign above read, "The Road of Hope Foundation." Their faces glowed with quiet pride as children in worn uniforms clapped and cheered. The foundation was their gift to the world. A place that would give scholarships to the children of drivers, mechanics, and roadside workers, kids who had dreams bigger than their circumstances. Malik watched as the first group of students walked through the gates. Some carried books so old their covers were torn, but their eyes held light. Amina stood beside him, smiling as she handed out notebooks. "Every child here reminds me of us," she whispered, hungry for a chance but never giving up. Malik nodded, his eyes misty. "They'll drive their own roads one day," he said quietly. News of their foundation spread quickly. Newspapers called them the couple who drove love into legacy. Radio stations across Africa told their story, the woman who married a poor driver, and the man who turned a steering wheel into an empire. Their story became more than a tale of success. It became a lesson in faith, patience, and shared vision. As cameras captured the grand opening, Malik stood before the crowd and spoke with a steady voice. "She married a driver," he said, looking at Amina lovingly. "But she saw a dreamer, and dreams, when shared with faith, can drive the world forward." The audience erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the air like the roar of engines. When the sun dipped low and the convoy of Awino logistics trucks began to move again, the sound was no longer noise. It was music. It was destiny rolling forward, steady and strong. And as the narrator's voice faded into the closing scene, the words lingered softly in the air. "They laughed when she married a driver, but destiny was behind the wheel all along." The engines roared once more, not just of trucks but of hearts inspired to believe again.